Hey, welcome to Fans of the Forge. I'm Chris. I'm here with Jamie Lundell, and we are at Dragon's Breath Forge in Wolcott, Connecticut.
Yeah, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful.
So we stopped in for Maker Saturday, small Maker Saturday, and so we've had people coming through all day doing some forging demos for them, as well as showing off knives and stuff like that. How's it been going so far?
Things have been great. Things have been great. Did a couple of forging demos. Had a lot of engagement from local folks, and it's kind of nice to open up the doors and kind of expand the community of bladesmithing.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're local too, so it was only a matter of time before we could get ourselves down here and check it out, because we were literally one town over, and I was glad we were able to swing by and be able to, chat with you guys and see what's going on here.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you here.
So you were on season 1, episode 7, and
the Roman Gladius.
The Roman Gladius, and also on that episode was your shopmate Mareko.
Yes, although at that point in time he was not my shopmate.
Right, he was over in Seattle at the time, or Washington State, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, up near Olympia.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So you came in and you had 15 years of full-time experience at the time, and you had mentioned you're into medieval reenacting. Are you still doing that, like on a regular basis, doing medieval reenacting?
Oh yeah, man! I was just fighting in the snow last weekend.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty good, pretty intense.
Cool. Oh, nice.
I was wearing modern boots though, and I felt kind of bad about it because a lot of people were like wearing their medieval stuff. And I'm like fully Gore-Texed up on my feet, and they're like warm and dry. And I'm looking at people like sopping boots, and they're just like they're looking miserable. I'm like, I feel a little bit guilty, but not really.
I don't blame you. I mean, you're already out there fighting with swords and whatnot. At least have a little bit of comfort.
Yeah. I mean, who wants to be slipping and sliding in the snow? Not me.
Yeah, exactly. So for round 1, you were given a ball bearing, and you had to make a blade that was between 9 and 13 inches long, and it had to have a hollow grind. Now, when you saw the ball bearing, what was going through your head?
Seeing the ball bearing, it was a kind of an unknown element for me. I had never forged down a ball bearing into a blade. I generally start with bar stock, right? So,
right.
But having done a lot of decorative ironwork, I have worked with a lot of like large stock and forging it down, and so that process I'm familiar with. One of the big things was the fact that it was 52-100.
Okay.
Which is not a steel that I really use ever. Actually, that was the one time that I used it. One thing that helped me out in the episode was that you just kind of like a knowledge of metallurgy. Not that I am at all like any sort of authority on it, right? But you got a working knowledge of stuff. And
sure.
So, knowing that 52-100 has really high carbon content, and the 52 series has a lot of chromium. And chromium carbide is it forms a lot of chromium forms a lot of carbides, right? So you need to break those carbides down before you start forging things out, or you tend to fracture, right? And and those chrome carbides don't break down until like a higher temperature, and they need to soak. So just because the outside of that 2-inch ball bearing was up to temperature and had soaked long enough, didn't mean that the inside had. So I kind of had that knowledge, and just I made sure that I just let things sit, and I just kind of took my time.
Yeah.
And one thing that had come out in that episode was a lot of people had fractures in their steel.
Right.
And so
I feel like that's a common thing that happens when they introduce a ball bearing as well, because guys see it getting up so bright, so on the verge of yellow or white on the outside, and then they go stick it in the press, and it's not moving the way they think it's going to move for something that's that hot, and because they didn't leave it in long enough still to get the inside warmed up.
Yeah, and especially using a press, that puts a lot of stress.
Yep.
That continuous pressure is pretty tough on steel.
Right.
So you got to make sure that it's up for it at that point.
Gotcha.
So
So you went with a kukri style design, and you started off by grinding a couple flat spots on the ball so that you could hold it with the tongs, and then the tongs broke.
Yeah, because I was like, everybody's going to weld a handle, right? I figured that everybody was going to go that route, and I was going to save time by not doing that. It got me into the forge quicker, so I didn't even like bother going to get tongs until I had the flats ground. And then when I went to go get tongs, like there were a couple of pairs that I had eyeballed on my way in, and I was like, oh, I'm going to use those. But by the time I got over there, they were all gone. And so I picked up this pair of tongs that were pretty janky. I saw there was like a pretty big fracture, at the jaw. Yeah, man, and they just barely held on, just long enough to get it out of the forge, and then it broke.
Yeah.
And so, I found a different pair of tongs and ended up working out just fine.
Yeah.
But it was kind of hilarious. I mean, you just at that point you just got to like laugh and just keep moving forward.
Oh yeah, I mean it's got to be a lot of stress at that time, right? So any little thing like that, it's just you have to brush it off and keep moving, or else you're just gonna fall off your track of where you're going with what you're making.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, honestly, is like once like the build up to it is super stressful and like the super anxiety building.
Yeah.
And then once that clock starts going, it's like it's time to work, and it becomes less anxiety. Well, for me, I found my anxiety level dropped as soon as that clock started going.
Right.
And then of course it like kicked back up when like I'm like grinding and I'm noticing that I'm not getting like completely flat grinds, and I'm like, oh, is a camera watching this? Is a camera seeing this? Am I fucking up on national television? And so there's certainly the anxiety of that.
Right.
But that first round really turns into like some problem solving skills and how well you do under pressure, because they got that clock ticking down and you have like 15 cameras looking at you, and you just hope that it's not watching you like, crash and burn.
Right. So for the judging on that, you had good notes. It was a good feel of your blade, and your hollow grind was good, and you moved on to round 2. And for round 2, you the crack that you had to take care of in your blade,
which was a scratch.
It was just a scratch,
not a crack. Not a crack. I spent a bunch of time hand sanding that though, because it was pretty light. Having gone through the hollow grind, I didn't use all of the material in that in that ball bearing. I cut a bunch off.
All right.
I was really paranoid about the parameters, so I kept on checking and checking and checking. But I pretty much didn't do any grinding on a machine in the second round. I just did all hand sanding.
Oh, okay.
Because I didn't want to remove excess material.
Right.
The downside of that was that 52-100 hardens up like a son of a bitch, so it was like that hand sanding took fucking forever. I think I spent half my time, at least the first hour, hand sanding.
Yeah, that is rough. And then there was one note that you only used epoxy to hold the handle to the blade. And the judges generally get a little nervous about that if there's no pins in there. Were you nervous about it, or you just did what you had to, you knew it was going to stay?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing, is that when you look back, if you take the sacks, right, used for hundreds and hundreds of years by several different cultures, not a single one had a peened handle or a hole in the tang for a pin. And if it hadn't been, and they were using... what were they? Butchers, whatever. Like, so they're using like basically pitch to keep things in there.
Oh yeah.
And if that worked, I mean, my like 10-ton epoxy is going to be just fine, right?
Yeah.
There was some texture on the tang for it to grip to.
Yep.
And I had no worries. The big worry that comes into those moments are, if you have whatever you have for your assembly method, your handle, if you have pockets that are not full of epoxy, if you have voids in there, that's where things break. Whenever you see a handle break, you'll see that there's a hollow where there wasn't epoxy. It happened to Salem. He had a friggin' awesome knife,
right?
But he was using a stabilized burl, and there was just a pocket where the epoxy didn't fill in. and that becomes the weak point, and that's where things will fail.
Gotcha.
But yeah, no, I had no worry that my blade was going to come flying out. I've made several blades like that, and then beaten the ever-living snot out of them, and they've held up just fine.
Yeah.
So.
So then for testing, you had the ice block chop.
Yeah.
And they hit that ice block 6 times. Had you ever tested any blades like that on ice before?
No, I've never done an ice block chop.
Okay.
It looks like a lot of fun, though.
Yeah, right. But you did well. You didn't have any deformation, and the comments were that it was comfortable, and you did a good job on your blade. So that brought you into the final round against Mareko. Mm-hmm. And you guys had to make the Roman Gladius, legendary weapon.
Yeah.
This show's all about legendary weapons, and this is legendary amongst legendary weapons.
Absolutely.
So, were you excited to see that? Like when they pulled the curtain back and they show you it's a Roman Gladius? What were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking it's very much in my comfort zone. I mean, the blade isn't very long, so that makes it a lot easier to forge and heat treat. It's just a much easier blade to manage than something larger. Like, the longer you get, the more difficult that is. And, I've made plenty of big swords, so I wasn't really all that nervous about it, about what the reveal was going to be. But I saw that it was a Roman Gladius, and I was actually pretty excited because there's a lot that you can do with that.
Yeah.
And the fittings and everything can be very simple, but you can get pretty elaborate with those.
Sure.
So, so I was pretty excited about that. Yeah, moving forward, actually I just made another Gladius not too long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was probably one of the most complex blades that I've made.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
So for this one, you made a 108-layer Damascus billet.
Yep.
Now, did you have any issues like in making the Damascus, or because I know sometimes there's the possibility of cracks forming or delaminations happening between your layers?
Yeah. Well, so I was super nervous about it because that was actually only the 3rd piece of Damascus that I had ever made.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Since then, I've made hundreds. Right. But at that point, I was kind of nervous about doing it. I wasn't, I was not at that point in my smithing career incredibly comfortable making Damascus. Mm-hmm. But in a conversation that I had with Peter, that came down to, if you get to the end, you want to make something that is going to be the type of thing that you want to make in the future, because people are going to watch this and say, oh, he made that thing and I want things like that.
Yep.
And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to do more Damascus. I wanted to do more intricate blades. So I really tried to take that opportunity to produce something that was, along the lines of the things that I wanted to make in the future. Yeah. Because you have an opportunity to show the world what you can do. And if you just go ahead and say, all right, well, 5160 is really tough and that's easy. Yeah. You could do that, but then people are just going to want to buy 5160 blades from you. They're not going to look and be like, oh, that guy made some pretty sick Damascus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. I've never heard that answer to something like that. And that is neat. It's like a stepping stone for yourself as you show off what you're doing and then putting it out there to the world. So
yeah. You got your 15 minutes of fame and you just got to make the most of it.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. On the 3rd day, you had ground out your shape and you quenched, and there was a little bit of a warp that you couldn't really remove it. So you just said, meh, I'll focus on the details for the rest of the weapon. And was there anything else that they didn't show that you, like for the warp, that you had to think about, or you were okay with the minimal warp that was there? It wasn't too bad.
And that's a thing that now, see, I've been trying to get back on. Every time they do a casting call, I send them like, "Hey, I want to get back on.
Sure.
I want to get back on." It's like my that warp would not be a thing now. Like I've since that show, I've done so much more. Yeah. And learned so much more. But anyways, so yeah, I could at that point I couldn't get that warp out. I tried like 3 times. I did several different temper cycles to try to get it out in the temper. And I was just not able to remove it. And like you had mentioned, I kind of was like, I just got to go to the 9s with everything else. Yeah. And so I did all the carving, and I spent my last 10 hours making a wood core leather wrap scabbard with the bronze fittings that had like 5 seconds of airtime. And there was actually a debate of like whether or not they were going to put it on.
Oh my gosh.
So it was like between Will and Jay. Jay was like, "Oh, this isn't a scabbard making competition," and Will's like, "The scabbard stays up," and they apparently that was the first time they ever got into a fight was because of that. And they had asked me about it, and I was like, "Well, I mean, I don't think," and this is not a thing that they had ended up airing, but they were like, "So, Will was like, so why did you choose to do a scabbard?" I'm like, "Well, I don't think that any Legionnaire was sent on campaign with a Gladius that didn't have a scabbard."
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so that was that. And I also, and then that fortune favors the bold. I had that whole quote from Odysseus that I had printed out and made a little scroll, and I put it in the packaging.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's cool. So you go back to the forge.
Okay.
And you have 3 tests to go through.
Yeah.
Your slice test was a cut through branches, vines, and sugar canes, and it was a good blade. It was very sharp, but the handle rotated in his hand while he was testing. It was Doug was testing.
Yep.
That was really all they kind of said about it, but you made it through okay. Now, did you have any concerns prior to going there that something like that could be an issue? Or
Well, I was looking at it in a purely kind of historical kind of way, and a lot of those blades, a lot of those handles were round,
right?
And so that it was not a thing that had really occurred to me up until that point, and you could see it as he's swinging it, And so stepping out of that round, I was definitely nervous because I think Mareko's blade performed better than mine. I mean, it was his blade was lighter than mine and had. Mareko is a man of skilled smith, and so I was at that point feeling like I was not on top.
Okay. So then you moved into the kill test, which was on a ballistics dummy, and you had some very deep lacerations and very good kill shots, so it will kill. And then the strength test, they bring out this swinging rig to swing it against one of their Roman Gladiuses. And you had a strong sword, but there was a little bit of minor damage, I believe, on the edge. And but otherwise, the note was that it would have broken a soldier's arm really easily, like if you had swung.
It actually broke the stand that was holding it.
Oh wow! Okay.
That was holding the other sword. It actually broke that stand down.
Yeah.
So it performed really well there. I mean, anytime you go edge to edge, you're not going to make it through unscathed.
Right, you're asking for damage. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And so coming out of that, it felt pretty strong on that point. It was built very robustly too. So it had. As far as strength goes, I mean, it was built pretty strong.
Yeah. So it came down to the judging. There was a little bit of minor things like the edge damage, and Mareko, his had a bend in the handle. Mareko said he was watching with his wife, and she was surprised. Like, he had already said he had lost to her like ahead of time, and going into that, she was still thinking that he was going to win it. And when you watch it, it's such a close call to see who's going to come out with the win there. But there you go, you won the episode.
Yeah.
So, what did you end up doing with the 10,000 that you got for that episode?
So I told them that what I was going to do with it, and they never aired it because it's not glamorous or exciting. I paid off all my debts.
Hey, that's a great thing.
I ended up debt free.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So you did a great job on that episode.
Thank you.
I can't wait. Hopefully you get back on there again and we could see it tear it up again in there.
Yeah, I hope so. Maybe we should start a write-in campaign.
Hey, we'll do it. We're local. We can write some letters for you. So I have a few more questions.
All right.
You already answered one of them because I asked you the last time you were doing some sword fighting, and you told me about that, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you currently have any armor that you're working on?
So I've been trying to get out of the armor business.
Okay.
Right. So, because I found that like I was doing a little bit of everything for a while. I was doing my jewelry, I was doing the swords and knives, the decorative ironwork, the armor. I was apprenticed to a farrier for 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So like when it came to doing any sort of metal work, I was trying to do a little bit of everything, and I got to a point of being like, I want to get really good at some things. Like and where my passion is with swords and knives and like developing Damascus patterns and doing all that stuff. That's where I get the most amount of pleasure in metal work. And so I've been trying to do more of that. And of course, as I'm like, all right, guys, I'm not making any more helmets or anything like that, I got like 5 guys being like, oh, but make me this helmet. So I do have a helmet that I'm going to be getting done by the end of the year. It's like a Roman Gladiator helmet.
Okay.
But I tend to not put the stuff up on Instagram because I don't want more people to ask me about it.
Oh yeah, sure.
You know, so I end up going silent on Instagram for a week and a half or whatever it is, and it's because I'm working on something like someone decided to pay me to, build some silly anime sword, and I just don't want to tell everybody I'm doing those things.
Sure.
And there you go. Now you know.
Okay, I got one last question for you.
Man, shoot.
So, when starting a new Damascus pattern, is there a first step for you in determining what you think the end result's going to look like?
Talk to Mareko.
Well, he said he's constantly walking around with a pad of paper so that he can start sketching wherever he is if he comes up with an idea. Mm-hmm. So Mareko's like your source.
Oh, he's the man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All of the, recently I posted pictures of an axe that I did, and that was a pattern that was inspired by Mareko. Mm-hmm. And, I saw him doing this thing, and I was like, oh, but if I do that same layout, but I do twisted bars as opposed to biased, and then add this on that end, and, so I kind of built off of that base idea, and just seeing the mosaic patterns that Mareko comes up with, that's really inspiring to me because I had never really done much in the way mosaic stuff.
Okay.
A lot of the work that I had been doing has been, I do a lot of twisted Viking style Damascus, and so yeah, I mean, I look at things and I might get inspired by like an end grain that I end up developing for something, and not intending for it to be an end grain pattern, but like for a twist, I had done one with like a crushed W's outside and a dark line in the middle, and then 2 bright lines on the outside of that, right?
Sure.
So, and that's what the Gladius that I was telling you about. I did the Thunderbolt pattern,
right? And
so that was developed from that end grain. I was looking at it from I just done a twist for like an elven short sword, and I was looking at it. I'm like, oh man, that's really cool. And what if you just crushed this and then stack it and then and so but my mind had never really thought of Damascus like that until I was spending time with Mareko. So he's been an absolute inspiration, and him moving out here has been like one of the most awesome things.
Oh, great!
So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Well,
so I mean, and that's probably the best part of Fortune Fire is like building that relationship, and then just the other relationships outside of that, right?
Sure.
Becoming more of that community, and because for going up to that, had been very much outside of that community. I hadn't been doing a lot of swords and knives. We had done some for Ren fairs, and then stopped doing the Ren fairs, and then been doing a lot of iron work, and it really has brought focus back towards blades, which I'm super thankful for because it's right near Thanksgiving, and and thankful for that, and just the opportunity to be doing all this stuff and with awesome shopmates. So
well, that's great. Thank you for taking the time to sit with us and do an interview. We really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll be able to come down and check out some of your classes in the future and get a little hands-on time myself. But hey, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Check out Jamie on Instagram. You can see all the cool stuff he's working on there. And we'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Take it easy.